Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 318 of the Fun with Cars Motorsports Podcast, or episode 5 of 2022. I'm Robin Warner, and today I'm joined by the man who pleaded with Red Bull Racing that, despite the marketing win, engines don't run well on energy drinks. Christopher Roche. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Robin.
It is Tuesday morning, March 22nd, and we are going to talk about the Bahrain Grand Prix and briefly catch you up on IndyCar, IMSA, and WEC races as well. It all happened this past weekend. Chris, pretty boring weekend. I can't even say the whole sentence. Crazy weekend. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, there was a lot going on even before the racing got started. Just a little bit of interesting news. So obviously we lost Vettel before the weekend with COVID. So your favourite Nico, he's your second favourite Nico, isn't he? Your second favourite Nico in motor racing was back in at Aston Martin. I love all the
Nicos equally, Chris.
So Mr. Hulkenberg super subbed. We'll talk about his performance subsequently. We had some interesting updates from the FIA. So, shock horror, it was human error that caused the debacle at Abu Dhabi. They didn't.
What?
They didn't exactly name Massey as the human that made the error, but I think we could all, connect the dots there.
How much do you think all these things? Do you think these things needle at Red Bull Racing at all, or do you think they could just give a whiff and just carry on like whatever, we still won?
Yeah, I think they couldn't care less. I think this is just trying to have some closure for the rest of the F1 fraternity and fans. I think the only thing that irritates me, I think it's good that the FIA got the report out and sort of came clean on their assessment and basically admitted that, yes, they didn't follow their own rules. But this persistence that there is only sort of a binary reaction to this admission, that either the race result stands and Verstappen is champion, or you void the race entirely and therefore Max Verstappen is champion, is absurd, because we all know that the FIA like nothing more than to do the old count back for race results in other situations, like when they red flag a race for bad weather, for example. They always go back like a couple of laps to record the results. So of course that option, that whole area of grey that you could interpret the result, is completely disregarded in this situation. Look, I mean, I don't think it would help the sport if we nixed Max's title at this point and made Lewis an 8-time world champion. I don't think anyone benefits from that. I think the important thing is that we conclude what was done right and wrong, and we learn and we move forward, and we don't have that happen again. I guess we're now going to have automated unlapping messages because it's just too tricky for the race director to just say all the lapped cars have to unlap themselves, as opposed to picking out the ones he prefers. So they're definitely moving in the right direction.
Yeah, that part is correct. I completely agree with you. And this is my broken record moment. To a certain extent, it is so incredibly complex, the set of rules that the FIA has concocted for Formula One, and indeed all of motorsport. We have all these exceptions and provisos and what if this and what if that just keep layering on top of each other, and that just adds to this mess, in my opinion, and makes it possible for mistakes like this to be made. But the fact of the matter is that emotions were running high. It was the heat of the moment, and Massey made just a truly bizarre call. And every single thing he made it more difficult for Lewis Hamilton, when everything Lewis Hamilton had done had maximized his chances to win the race and indeed the championship.
Yeah, it is. It's always going to be one of those bizarre footnotes of history when we look at championships that I think 21 will always be cited as being a curious result for that. But another thing that was a sore point last year was the interpretation of what was legal defensively as a driver or aggressively as a driver. So we had new overtaking rules that try to clarify exactly what is and is not permissible. and they talk about the definition
of pinkies
of
out. You have to pass with your pinky out. Is it like a tea time kind of thing?
I mean, they're defining basic things like track limits, that when another car is alongside you, you can't force them off the track. Basic stuff like that worked for decades until sort of the last couple of years when Max decided to rewrite them. So it'll be interesting to see how those will be interpreted by our new FIA directors and the various people that have to administer and adjudicate on those rules. But I guess we did get some evidence over the weekend where we had a collision between Mick Schumacher and Ocon, and that was dealt with quickly and with a 5-second penalty. So it looks like they're going to be maybe following those rules a bit more clearly this year. So I think that's all good news, that we have clear rules and they're followed.
Yeah, except that the folks at Sky Sports were kind of like, wasn't that just a race incident? But anyway.
I was just going to finish on a couple of other little Formula One rule changes that may have missed the average fan. So we have, from a qualifying perspective, a subtle change that the tyre that the driver uses in Q2 to qualify on doesn't have to be his starting tyre this season.
Yes.
So that could change, the tactics there. You have a free tyre choice now at the start of a Grand Prix wherever you qualify. So that obviously was quite big in terms of tyre strategy last season and is now more of a clean slate.
And that does take away one of the silver linings of qualifying 11th or 12th.
Right, it does, yeah.
It's like, well, I get free tyre choice and those guys don't. That's something.
Yeah. And then also the tyre blanket temperatures have changed for this year. So the tyres aren't as heated as much prior to being fitted to a car in a pit stop. So,
was it 90 degrees centigrade before or Celsius before? Now it's 80. I think the new temperature max is 80. I feel but do you remember the old versus new temps?
No, I haven't gone to that level of detail, but it was obvious that they were definitely cooler and that the drivers were having a tougher time on the outlap.
Lewis Hamilton displayed that rather well for us, I thought, after his first pit stop.
Yeah, and there is also a new award for this season. It's called the Overtake King Award. I guess it'll be awarded on a race-by-race basis and on a season basis, and it's a social media vote. I haven't seen the result for Bahrain yet, so it takes a while to process, I guess, this award, but that's something else to get excited about if you're a big social media voter fan.
Yeah, but what's the point of that? I mean, I don't. It just seems it's a meaningless, silly nothing burger, if you ask me.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Real quick, I just want to make a correction. Last week's show, I had a great interview with Simon Pagenaud, and he talked about how Sebastian Bourdais was kind of a mentor in getting him into the United States in the first place, and I spurted out that Sebastian Bourdais had won 4 IndyCar championships in a row, and I said it was either 2000, 2003 or 2001 to 2004, something like that. I was just off by a few years. It was between 2004 and 2007, and I'm kicking myself for that because, of course, it was Paul Tracy that won the championship in 2003, and that was a very memorable championship for me. And I think, now I'm going to have another corrections next week, I think it was Cristiano D'Amata before that. But anyway, so just real quick, Sebastian Bourdais won 4 championships in a row in IndyCar between 2004 and 2007. Okay. So no more testing or questions or anything like that. We've had a Grand Prix. We've absorbed it. We now know who was juicy sweatpants wearing and who was not. And we know where the performance lies across the teams. And we also know that Kevin Magnussen is a really happy guy these days.
Well, first of all, Robin, I think kudos to you. You predicted a Ferrari double podium, didn't you, last week?
I did, with Leclerc winning, I do believe.
And no Red Bulls on the podium, so you were spot on. Well, many congratulations. No correction required there. Amazing.
I tweeted about that as I saw it happen. I was like, who predicted this? I'm the Oracle. So I've set the standards quite high for myself this season. It's going to be a fun one.
we definitely have a set of results now, and we'll dig into those. I think we should be cautious about assuming that the performance that we saw in Bahrain will be replicated throughout the season. I think Bahrain is quite a unique track, and it's quite bouncy, which was bumpy, I should say, that obviously helps to get the cars bouncing even before they start bouncing on their own. So we may see that the performance order change quite dramatically from race to race. Certainly, I'm anticipating that early on in the season. And that may not be the case right at the front. We may still see Ferrari and Red Bull be the quickest cars, but we might see certainly Mercedes close up a bit, potentially. We might see the middle order chop and change. We might see teams like McLaren and Aston Martin suddenly leap up the order if they can get a handle on their particular issues. So I don't think we should conclude that this is how it's going to be for the rest of the season. But it was fascinating looking at the performance of all the teams relative to each other and some of the new drivers and how they fared. I mean, great to see Ferrari. Ferrari introduced a really interesting car, and they didn't really dramatically change it throughout the first two pre-season tests. And that consistency of just sorting out their car, getting it to work properly, seems to have paid real dividends, because they essentially dominated the weekend, didn't they? They had probably the best performance and the best reliability, and therefore they nailed the 1-2 fairly easily in the end, as the Red Bulls fell by the wayside.
Yeah, it was absolutely impressive, and it has been just long enough, I think, since Ferrari's last episode of just true dominance, that to see them coming out right at the front, right at the beginning of the season, really felt refreshing. And just so nice to see that it is not going to be a continuation of Mercedes' dominance. Not because Mercedes' dominance is a bad thing on its own, but because we can't just keep going on without any shift or change. People will lose interest no matter what fan votes or other gimmicks people come up with. So it's the best possible thing for the sport to see the most famous Formula One team in the world be back on top after, what would you say, 15 years of kind of being there or thereabouts at times, but largely kind of on the back foot.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking that their last championship was way back in 2008. That we've gone through a whole decade without them winning a championship.
That's right.
At all.
So Kimi Räikkönen won the drivers in 2007, and then Ferrari won the constructors in 2008, and that was it. Yeah, and Massa was very close to the drivers, but yeah. So it's been a minute.
Yeah, and then of course the last win wasn't since 2019 in Singapore with Sebastian Vettel. So it's been a long time just standing on the top step. And so to get a double podium 1-2 with Charles really leading the way. I mean, not only did he stick it on pole by more than a tenth of a second, but he had to go wheel to wheel with Max. We got some fantastic racing during the course of the Grand Prix. And Charles demonstrated that he's not going to be a pushover. He fought pretty hard, and ultimately, you would say that at times he had complete control, seemingly, of the race pace. It was only through the pit stop changes that Max was able to really have a crack at him, and seems to have, struggled with tyres and brakes as a consequence. But it was some great racing. What did you make of it?
Yeah, and engine too a little. The thing with Charles Leclerc and Verstappen was, we talked about afterwards, that it got to the point where Leclerc said, all right, he was deliberately letting him by in turn one so that he would ensure that he got DRS going down the short chute into turn 4. So it was really, I think, kind of masterclass. The idea to let someone by on purpose so you can get them back, and then you feel strong that you can keep them behind you then, that's impressive, but also bold. I was quite impressed with all of it. Yeah,
because there were some people saying that Max should have bided his time through through turn one to get the DRS into 4 and then be able to hold the lead all the way around the rest of the lap. So some people were thinking that Max didn't maybe play that as smartly as he should. But it was staggering, the Red Bull's closing speed with the DRS open on the main pit straight, wasn't it? I mean, he was being able to dive down the inside from way back.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if it's just a function of the Red Bull or the new cars. But I don't think we saw anyone else have such a powerful speed advantage with the DRS open.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It was impressive to watch. But then over a lap, and certainly over a stint, you could tell that the Ferrari was comfortable. But the strategy Red Bull was employing with the undercut almost paid off twice. And the second time around, they even said, hey, make sure to be clean on your outlap so that these tires can warm up appropriately. And Max was definitely not happy about that. We heard radio exchanges between him and his team about how that screwed him up. But over a stint, it was clear that Leclerc had a fair amount of pace advantage.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. It's clear, though, that the differential between the Ferrari and Red Bull's not enormous, is it? Because obviously Max was able to comfortably outperform Carlos over the weekend. I mean, it was very tight in qualifying. I think it was only 0.06 of a second. But during the course of the race, both Charles and Max were able to pull away from their number 2 drivers, essentially, as it was at least in Bahrain, in terms of Sergio and Carlos. So it looks like a great 4-way battle there between the two top teams at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And, they fell off, but it wasn't by massive amounts. It was, a few seconds, but not 15 or 20. So I think that that's actually an encouraging sign. Just as you said, we've got several races ahead of us, and we could see a change in the order here. We're not seeing someone's clearly falling way behind here, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I think Carlos was very frustrated, wasn't he, post-race? I think he felt that he wasn't... it was the most he'd struggled since he's joined Ferrari, and was expecting to be certainly closer to Charles's ultimate pace, in which case, he could have been up there fighting with Max throughout the race. But ultimately, it didn't really matter. He got a second place as the Red Bull-powered cars started to drop like flies. I mean, I was thinking just before Pierre Gasly's barbecue that we were, it was shocking that with a whole new generation of car that we hadn't had a single retiree. And then all of a sudden we see Gasly pull over with the back end on fire. It sounds like it was I read that it was the MGU-H had a problem and that caused the fire, as opposed to any other part of the power unit. And that's a different issue to what struck both Max and Sergio. So they both had a fuel pump issue. So it sounds like Red Bull never did a full race distance or enough running on low fuel when the fuel itself was hot.
So maybe the pump starved a little bit.
So yeah, they're saying it was either a vapor lock or the pump itself failed because of the temperature of the fuel and it wasn't sufficiently cooled or something of that nature. But yeah, they both had fuel starvation issues, and that's why they both basically stopped. So potentially quite a quick fix if they can get on top of that. It's not a fundamental issue with the internal combustion engine. It's the fuel system. So, but it was amazing.
So are you saying it wasn't the energy drink issue that I mentioned at the top?
I don't think they're using Red Bull in their fuel mixture. But there's a requirement to run, I think, ethanol at 10%.
Yeah, E10.
Yeah, and so that has changed, obviously, the fuel and the combustion and the temperature of the fuel, and that's what may have caught them out. It's odd. I mean, Red Bull, aren't normally caught out like that. So, really, I mean, it was just a disastrous end to their race, with Max obviously struggling with the steering issue, which sounded like it was a bent track rod from one of their pit stops. And then he was claiming he had other problems during the course of the race and was very frustrated, with a variety of things.
I knew it all along, Chris. I mean,
so yeah, I mean to see Sergio spin out with a lap to go was just extraordinary, and obviously it handed Mercedes and in particular Lewis Hamilton a lifeline, because they had been well off the pace, and looked like 5th and 6th were the best they could hope for, and then all of a sudden Lewis is on the podium. So not ideal for Red Bull at all.
So real quick, this is a headline right on Formula1.com. Sainz calls Bahrain his most difficult weekend as a Ferrari driver, despite podium finish. So just to emphasize what you were just describing, he has mixed emotions about the weekend, certainly. And during his podium conversation with Martin Brundle, he said, yeah, it was a tough weekend for me, but we were able to put it together. So it's kind of like, yeah, it obviously ended well, but I think his own personal goals were not met, and that was the source of the frustration ultimately. But let's talk a little bit more about Mercedes. Where do you think their pace is? It seems like they seem to be struggling a little bit more with the porpoising issue or the bouncing issue. That they seem to be struggling with that more than average.
Yeah, exactly. And because they haven't got a handle on the porpoising, they're having to run the car at a higher ride height, and therefore they're losing downforce. So they, it's interesting when you go. Most of the teams were similarly affected, certainly in the first test at Barcelona with porpoising. In fact, Ferrari was one of the teams that was struggling the most with it, and they seem to have now found a pretty good solution where they can run the car at the right ride height and not be struggling with the porpoising. But Mercedes clearly are still further up the learning curve, and other teams are too. I think Aston Martin's still struggling with it a lot. So as the teams resolve their own issues with porpoising, we'll actually, I think, start to see a better relative performance between the cars, the ultimate performance between the cars, when they can all run it in a condition where the porpoising's under control and they can run it at the ride height that they wanted to get the maximum out of the Venturi tunnel. So it's I think what we'll see with Mercedes is that as they start to solve their problems, we might see some big improvement in ultimate performance. I mean, clearly it wasn't there in Bahrain, but yet, 3rd and 4th is a pretty good save. When you looked at their pace on Friday or Saturday, it looked like they could have been outperformed by the likes of Haas or Alfa Romeo and been right down the order, trying to pick up a point or two. In the end, they picked up 27. So it's a good weekend for them despite their troubles, but they certainly need to find some performance really quickly in order to be able to compete with Red Bull and Ferrari.
How did you feel about George Russell's performance?
Well, George had missed a Saturday, as he got termed when he was driving for Williams. Certainly had a big issue on Saturday in Q3. He only had one Q3 run, and he made a mistake at turn 1, locking up, ruining his lap. So he only qualified 9th, which honestly is not good enough. I'm sure he was unhappy about it, but he more than made up for that on Sunday. Basically it was Hamilton's wingman. He was clearly not quite on Hamilton's ultimate pace.
But he was close. He was
close, and he more than took care of the drivers around him. Ironically, Bottas did a typical Bottas performance, didn't he? He qualified well.
I was going to bring that up too, man, because for him to be as high up the grid as he was like, hey, this is great for him. And just real quickly, his teammate Zhou, I think he had a good start to it. I was impressed with his performance, but for Bottas to go down, 6 or 8 positions on the first lap, I was like, oh, buddy, come on.
I think he blamed some car issue. It might have been an issue with the clutch, but it was very typical, race and qualifying being night and day. But yeah, I think Russell redeemed himself and did,
real quickly, actually, Russell said that he tried something a little bit He just tried a very different way to warm up the tires. I had thought maybe if he was, I don't remember exactly if it was being more aggressive or less, but it's like, I'm going to try something different with tire warm-up to see if that helps. And he's like, and it clearly didn't. And that was kind of it. And just as he wrote it off in turn 1. Yeah,
he's going to want to be more competitive in qualifying as the season wears on, though, doesn't he? I mean, he can't afford to be 4 or 5 car positions off every weekend, or his position at that team will be questioned. But we'll give him a pass on his first weekend at Mercedes and the fact that he rescued it on Sunday when the points are paid out. I thought overall he did just fine though. I think the person we really need to talk about is Kevin Magnussen. What a weekend he had!
Absolutely
incredible.
I'm so elated for the man. I have met Kevin Magnussen. I interviewed him last year because he competed in IMSA last year, and he was at the duel in Detroit at the Detroit Grand Prix last year. And I was helping a friend out with a radio show that he puts together, and Kevin Magnussen was a guest. And he was contented to be where he was and racing where he was, but you could see, it was clear that he missed Formula One, and now that he's back, there's no hiding just the elation that he's feeling, and you can't question the performance either. My God. So the performance of the Haas, clearly on the up. And then Kevin Magnussen compared to Nikita Mazepin, wow.
Yeah. I mean, so he qualified 7th, just behind Valtteri. But if he'd been able to emulate his Q2 time in Q3, he would have actually been quicker than Bottas and would have been 6th on the grid, so best of the rest behind the big three teams, which is incredible. I mean, we have to give him allowance for the fact that he's been out of Formula One for a year. He's probably had limited
15
time.
months, he argues, because of the last race of 20 versus the first race of 22. So.
Yeah, okay. And then, absence of simulator time. I'm sure all the other drivers have been in the sims, over the winter. And because he got called up so late to replace Nikita.
But hold on. I like I said, I talked with Kevin Magnussen. He does play Gran Turismo, so it can't be that different.
So he qualifies brilliantly. And then, he backs it up in the race. And comfortably outperformed the Alpines, the Alfa Romeo with Bottas's recovering car. I think he was ahead of Gasly while Gasly was still running. So he was definitely leading the midfield and finished comfortably in 5th position. So he handled the restart as well and just delivered an absolutely outstanding weekend. I mean, you couldn't have asked for more, right? I mean, I don't think any optimist would have predicted a better qualifying and race result for Kevin and Haas, and that's just tremendous. It's just a wonderful story that he's managed to come back and perform so strongly, and he's put Haas right back where they used to be, back in the sort of 2018-19 era. So it's an amazing resurgence for him and the team.
So Mick Schumacher, he finished the race in 11th, and if Kevin Magnussen didn't exist, it was just Mick Schumacher in the Haas finishing 11th, we would have said, hey, that's not bad. Hey, so Haas has definitely improved. They were right there. They look like they could, in fact, be in the mid-pack and be competing. So that's a good on Haas. They did make a solid improvement. The reason why we're not saying any of that is because, the Haas was the 3rd fastest team at the end of the Grand Prix with the way everything shook out. So it's just incredible to see how much faster Mick looked last year compared to this year. Now, again, we're only one Grand Prix in. I'm not trying to set any of this in stone, but it's just so impressive to see what a difference a driver can make, truly. Yeah,
I mean, it's a sobering weekend for Mick. Last year, everyone gave him the benefit of the doubt because he was, comfortably quicker than Mazepin, which was expected, but well off the back of everyone else, which, given the Haas, was also expected. So you couldn't really judge his ultimate performance in an F1 car. But out-qualified significantly, out-raced significantly by a teammate who's been out of the sport for a year. I mean, beaten to the 10th place by another GP2. Well, he wasn't a champion, was he? But another GP2 racer that's graduated into Formula One.
GP2 front runner, for sure.
Thank you very much. That's the right term. So Joe getting the 10th place on his debut for Alfa Romeo. It's not ideal weekend at all for Mick. I mean, I'm sure he'll be heartened by the fact that the Haas is more competitive and he should be able to compete for points. But he needs to get closer to Magnussen's pace pretty quickly or he's going to have a tough year for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. But I think this is the best possible thing for Mick Schumacher, because if he can start getting more competitive against Kevin, that's a much better barometer of his performance and his potential. So this is also going to be stressful moments, but this is a good thing for Mick Schumacher to have much more serious competition as a teammate. So we mentioned Valtteri Bottas at the top. We have to give this man some credit. He ended up finishing 6th in the Alfa Romeo as well. That was definitely better performance from the Alfa than I was expecting, because just as you said, his teammate Zhou also finished in the points. Is Zhou Guan Yu? I have to start practicing that. I hope that's not too far off. So both Alfa Romeos finished in the points. Yes, that's because of Red Bull and AlphaTauri retirements to a certain extent, but still, that's better than I expected performance.
No, I agree. It was a decent recovery drive from Valtteri. We've known in the past in Mercedes that sometimes he struggled, even with a superior car, to make his way back through the field. But clearly, with the Alfa Romeo, he was able to do that. Obviously, the safety car and the 3 retirements helped him a little bit, but still, he's getting ahead of one of the Alpha Tauris, both Alpines, and then all the slower Mercedes-powered cars. So, yeah, good recovery from Valtteri and good start to his career. I mean, it's great. I mean, there was a lot made of the fact that he was lining up alongside Lewis on the grid. And so I don't think anyone anticipated that, him being demoted from Mercedes, going to Alfa Romeo. You would have thought he'd be a back runner, but it looks like there'll be plenty of opportunities for him in his new role, which is good for him, because he is a decent driver and deserves a reasonably competitive ride. And then Joe qualified 15th and was able to make 5 places, which is, again, helped by the 3 retirements. But compare that to Schumacher, who finished behind him, but yet started 3 places higher on the grid. So, their fortunes were going in different directions to a large degree. And so, we got to see some of his passing. I mean, he was, comfortable enough and making some pretty decent moves in his debut race. That's not a good start. I mean, we want new drivers in the sport that are going to be able to compete, right? And not look still like they're running in GP2, or F2. So that's good.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think now is a good point. There's definitely a few more teams we have to talk about, but now is a good point to say I'm feeling pretty darn good about this new era F1 car in terms of racing closely, the ability to pass. It's obviously improved.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I've got mixed feelings. I will say, when
it's too easy to pass. I want less passing. So says Christopher Roche.
Well, I don't know about you, but when I look at those cars, particularly running through the slower corners, they remind me of Formula E cars, and that's not a good thing. They don't look as quick as I'm used to seeing Formula One cars look. I'm sure that my memory will fade and I'll forget what the old 2020 cars used to look like in due course. But ultimately, they just don't look as nimble and as fast as I'm used to seeing. And so therefore, I then start to think about other single-seater categories like Indy cars or Formula E. And that's not really where the pinnacle of motorsport, single-seater racing should be, I don't think. But conversely, I agree with you. It does look like the cars are able to follow more closely, and therefore we should get better racing. So maybe it's a trade-off that we should be willing to accept. But I, definitely thought the cars looked slow at times.
Well, yeah, and I agree with you that at times it definitely was frustrating, their pace, but I think that's largely due to their weight. So we had this back and forth about from 792 to 795 kilogram weight. Over the weekend, I heard, no, not 795, it's 798 kilograms. So we're less than 5 pounds away. So I'm mixing units here. Apologize. We're less than 5 pounds away from 800 kilogram Formula One cars. Come on. To me, it's you got to get the weight down.
Yeah, I think that would definitely help in the slow turns. I think the other thing is, they were, about 3 seconds off the pace from last season. certainly in quali pace, I think that's about right. I think I would be willing to accept the slow corner sort of cumbersomeness if they looked electric through the fast turns, but they didn't. And I don't know, maybe it's the nature of Bahrain itself, the track, that we don't really get to see them looking really impressive with all the new underfloor downforce. Maybe somewhere like Spa or Suzuka, maybe give us a better, fair representation of these new cars. But so far, that was my conclusion from the first weekend. And again, I think the fact that we got good racing, the fact that you could follow more closely, that is definitely beneficial. And so we'll give it time. But that was my takeaway anyway.
I think you're absolutely right that there were times that the cars didn't seem like they should have, but I don't think that it's the way that it's generating downforce that is the cause of that. And I will say there is a part of me that wonders if Formula One should go a different direction, and as opposed to chasing the hybrid technology path, say we want to look at dust-to-dust carbon emissions and efficiencies and those types of things. And the lighter we can make our cars and the more efficient we can make the combustion chambers work and eventually lead to biofuels. But what if we had, instead of 800 kilogram Formula One cars, what if we had 500 kilogram Formula One cars? Do you see what I'm getting at? And if we look at, we have 110 liters of fuel to start, and let's pare that down to, okay, you get 100 liters of fuel. Okay, let's make it 90 liters of fuel, and start taking away emissions that way, not with hybrid technology, but with just good old-fashioned efficiency, or as the great Colin Chapman said, adding lightness, right? I mean, that would be the engineer's dream, or at least this engineer's dream, of how Formula One could improve its efficiency over time.
I mean, I think these internal combustion engines are already fabulously efficient compared to a standard road car. I think they're up around like 50%.
Over 40% combustion efficiency, engines alone. Yeah.
But, I mean, to your point, why not lower the minimum weight? Why not say, okay, let's see who can get to 750 kilos? And you may have some teams who can't get there that are running at 780 or 790 or whatever. But then at least they're incentivized to try and bring the weight down and use less ballast if they're below weight. So, there's definitely things that they could think about and do to try and promote a weight reduction, which would certainly help low speed performance, because they're going to look like SUVs running around Monaco, aren't they, these things?
Yes, and that's less than ideal. But it's interesting because the pushback to your statement about reducing the minimum weight is the cost cap and how our budget's spent. So that part of it is that I think the cost cap is what keeps allowing the minimum weight to creep up. It's like, well, we don't want people to spend money here, so let's just make the cars has to be a little bit heavier.
Well,
I don't know.
But that I think that would have made sense in the pre-cost cap era, because you're just going to drive more expenditure on more exotic materials and so on and so forth. But now that you have a cost cap, you can say, well, how smart can you be with the money at your disposal? And we won't take away the limitation on where you can achieve mass reduction. I mean, that would then find its way potentially across the spectrum of the automotive world. As you said, more efficiencies in the power unit or lighter weight solutions would be a good thing. But right now, they're not necessarily, unless they want to have more ballast and be able to move that ballast around, they're not really incentivized to chase ultimate weight reduction at this point because of that minimum weight being so high.
Yeah.
I mean, it will obviously have to see how the rules evolve, and hopefully people like Ross Brawn will see the same thing that we're talking about, and I'm sure they probably have, and find ways to address it. I think we, one of the interesting rule changes for this year with respect to the cars is the need to run these full wheel air deflectors or wheel spats, whatever you want to call them. And this is causing a lot of trouble. I mentioned earlier that the Red Bull, one of Verstappen's issue early on in the race was brake temperatures. And I guess getting enough cooling air now to the brakes, even though they can now be a larger diameter with the larger wheels, is a real issue. And that's really McLaren's issue. They are completely still struggling with this front brake issue.
Clearly they are in a rough place. McLaren
is. My goodness. So they introduced some changes to try and get, better brake temperatures and performance out of the brakes for the race, and it then disrupted the front aerodynamics of the car, and then their pace was absolutely lamentable. I mean, it was extraordinary that Norris managed to qualify 13th and get into Q2, but Daniel was way down in 18th. And then their pace in the race was awful. I mean, they went odd on tyre selection, and they started on the harder compound tyre, and they really didn't make tremendous progress until right at the end of the race, when they managed to nip up to 14th and 15th. But bad weekend for McLaren, and it's all due to this front brake temperature issue.
So you took away my joke a little bit. I was going to have a little quip about Williams is back out running McLaren, but and truthfully, it was a McLaren sandwich on Williams bread, because Albon was ahead of both McLarens, but Latifi was right behind them. So Alex Albon, he seems to be, in terms of relative pace, he seems to be starting off in a pretty good place, ahead of Latifi, similarly to the way that George Russell was, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, people were really worried about Williams on Friday because they pretty much looked the slowest. And Alex was struggling because I think it was quite windy, and he had a couple of moments, and so wasn't really going very quick relative to Latifi. I think Latifi was quicker than him on Friday. And so everyone was like, oh my goodness, Williams seemed to be at the back of the field again, and Alex isn't a true like-for-like replacement of George Russell. But when it mattered, he delivered. I mean, 14th was about as good as he could get, really. And then he followed that up with decent race performance. And I think, okay, he got pipped by an Aston Martin, but that, the other Mercedes runners were really who they were competing against, and they were in the mix. And Latifi seemed to do a little bit better in the race than he did in qualifying. It doesn't look like a complete disaster for Williams. And I think, again, we have to look at track-to-track sensitivity. And it didn't look like Bahrain suited Williams that well. But, yeah, I was impressed with Alex. He looked in trouble and he rescued it. And the team are all very positive about him. And I thought that was a good weekend for him.
And real quick, what do you think of Aston Martin? They seem to be not in a great place so far.
Well, I was going to point out that the two billionaire boys left in the sport qualified 19th and 20th. Stroll in 19th, Latifi in 20th. Hulkenberg out for even longer than Magnussen, comes in, out-qualifies Stroll, by about 0.3. That's not good enough for Lance, is it? Impressive by Nico.
How surprised are you by that, truthfully?
Not very.
Yeah.
I mean, Lance is more of an enigma, though, isn't he? Because we've talked about this in the past.
He's had bouts of real impressive pace. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, especially in the rain. I mean, that Turkish performance from a couple of years ago, where he qualified on pole and led the race for the first 20 laps or so, was an extraordinary performance. And he's done that. He did that for Williams on occasion at Monza. Another great qualifying performance in the wet. So Lance has more talent than certainly Mazepin, I would say. But, yeah, you shouldn't be being out-qualified by a guy who's just been, pulled in at the last second. That's not good enough for anybody, I don't think. And, to be fair, he did do a bit better on Sunday, didn't he? He finished 12th, so behind Mick Schumacher. So he did recover a little bit. But, yeah, Aston Martin have got problems. And I think the porpoising and having to run the car at a higher ride height, similar to Mercedes, is what's catching them out. So we're going to see, as I said earlier, once these guys figure out how to solve the porpoising issue, the true relative performance of these cars, and then we'll know if they really are in trouble and are going to be a back marker this season. Yeah.
So in just a few days' time, Formula One is going to be racing again at Saudi Arabia. It is this coming weekend, so we've got a 1-2. We're jumping in to the Formula One season with a doubleheader. So we're gonna be able to see this all over again in a very short amount of time. Real quick, we should go over the other race results. And for IndyCar, at least, we are going to jump into these a little bit more down the road, but it was Joseph Newgarden who won the race in Texas. But in second place was his teammate Scott McLaughlin. So Scott McLaughlin won the first race, second in the second race. So he's doing very, very well. And it was Marcus Ericsson that rounded out the podium. For IMSA, it was 3 Cadillacs on the top 3, with Bamber, Lynn, and Yanni winning the race and doing well. The top finishing Acura was a good friend of the show, Ricky Taylor, and Wayne Taylor Racing, and there was another Acura right behind him. The Meyershank Racing Acura finished 5th. And in World Endurance Championship, it was not Toyota Gazoo Racing that won that one. It was Alpine Elf Team that took the victory. Toyota finished second with New York-based Glickenhaus Racing rounding out the podium. So there you go.
It was a tight finish in the IndyCar, wasn't it? It was Newgarden didn't lead until coming onto the
Newgarden led the last lap. Yeah, Newgarden led the last lap. The very end of the last lap at that. It was right at the end. It was with lapped cars and the way everything sorted out. You could argue that Scott McLaughlin got a little unlucky, but you could also argue that Joseph Newgarden played his cards really well. So it was a very cool race to see. I'll put it this way because you know where my head's at. It was good for an oval race. So we'll leave it at that. Now, the next IndyCar race isn't until April 10th, but it is one of IndyCar's premier races is the Long Beach Grand Prix on April 10th. So that one's exciting. So all of that was just the warm-up for the most exciting part, and that, of course, is my YouTube video. I've actually got one coming out in about an hour, but I released one yesterday. Honda built a brand new wind tunnel, a $124 million facility, full-scale wind tunnel, and they gave me a tour of this place, and they let me bring my cameras, and I interviewed a couple people and everything. It was so super cool. You know about wind tunnels, you see them, you read about them, but to actually be in one and to see all the time and effort that goes into making one, seriously cool, seriously impressive.
I saw your written article. Were you actually able to be in the tunnel while they were running it with the smoke, so you could do the flow visualization, or were you behind glass?
No. I was in the tunnel. I was getting blown on. Now, they had it set to 50 kph, so it wasn't like we were maxed out or anything like that. But it was very cool to see the effect and how it works. And what was most impressive is to see how much time and effort goes into getting it uniform flow, taking away any turbulence that they can. And it wasn't obviously laminar, but it was like approaching laminar flow almost. It was just incredible to see.
And what was the carbon fiber sports car? The one that had no sponsorship or paint on it at all. Was that a brand new car for this season?
We weren't told, but I think what it was is, so the ARX 05 that Acura is racing through this year is based on, it originated as an Orica chassis, and what I think that might have been some early version of a modified Orica chassis before it became the final Penske car that we know today, or the originally Penske-sponsored Acura ARX 05 that we know today.
Okay, so it's an old car as opposed to a new car.
They said that one was 5 years old, is what they told me. 5 or 6 even. It was something like that. So that one's been around the block.
Still look pretty sweet though, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely so. And, anything raw carbon fiber is cool, which, by the way, the turbine for the wind tunnel itself also uses raw carbon fiber for its 12 blades, which is also cool. But anyway, for now, I want to thank you for listening. Please take a moment to review us on iTunes or on whatever platform you get our podcasts. Please leave comments on the episode of your choice by going to funwithcars.com. As always, I can be reached at feedback@funwithcars.com. Tweet us at fun_with_cars. And check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/FWCars. Chris, it is time for 11s.
So it is, mate.
I'm Robin Warner. Goodbye.